Dawn over the Carpathians. The first light of morning spills slowly across the Carpathian arc, brushing the high ridges with a pale golden glow. A damp hush lingers over the valleys, dew beating on spruce needles, mist curling above quiet meadows, silence drifting like a veil across the land. Far below the rocky crowns of the mountains, a river shimmers faintly, its winding silver thread vanishing into dark forests. The Danube, ancient and patient, moves toward the horizon with the same unhurried rhythm it has held for thousands of years. In this soft, waking landscape, time feels blurred. The world seems poised between darkness and day past and present. And it is here, amid mountains that rise like stone walls and river plains that stretch into the distance, that the story of the Dacians begins. For this land, the Carpatho-Danubian region was not merely a backdrop to Dacian civilization. It sculpted them. It cradled them. It taught them to defend, to endure, and to dream in ways that rivaled the greatest cultures of the ancient world. As the sun climbs higher, the contours of the geography reveal themselves: steep ridges, deep gorges, vast plateaus, and winding water routes that connect the interior highlands to the great Danubian frontier. Archaeologists often emphasize how crucial this environment was. For ancient peoples, geography was destiny, and for the Dacians, their homeland was both a sanctuary and a crucible, shaping a civilization whose uniqueness lay not only in material culture, but in spirit. A land of thresholds, the ancient Dacian world roughly corresponded to modern Romania, eastern Hungary, northern Bulgaria, and parts of Serbia and Moldova. Yet the borders were never static, for the terrain dictated influence more than lines drawn by rulers. When Greek geographers wrote of the Getae and Dacians, often blending or confusing the two, they described a people dwelling in a land of edges between mountain and river steppe, and forest Europe's heart and its frontier. The Carpathians, a sweeping horseshoe of stone, formed the kingdom's backbone. These mountains were not merely natural defenses, they were cultural boundaries that fostered distinct local traditions while also demanding cooperation between tribes. Sheltered valleys allowed for farming and pastoralism to thrive, while high plateaus became strategic locations for hill fort sanctuaries and early proto-urban centers. To the south, the Danube carved a vast frontier. Wide, powerful, and often treacherous, it separated the Dacian lands from the Balkans and later from Roman Moesia. Yet it also connected them to the wider world. Trade routes followed the river's course, bringing Greek pottery, wine, amphorae, and eventually Roman luxuries deep into the interior. The Danube was thus a boundary and a bridge, a theme that would echo again and again in Dacian history. To the east stretched windswept plains that reached toward the Black Sea. These grasslands linked the Dacians to steppe cultures, Scythians, Sarmatians, and later others whose movements reshaped the borders of Europe. From them came influences in weaponry, horsemanship, and social organization. To the west, rolling hills and rich soils opened pathways to the Celtic world of Central Europe. Geography placed the Dacians at a crossroads of civilizations, but one framed by natural fortresses. This duality, connected, yet protected, allowed them to flourish while remaining distinct. Roots beneath the soil. As we step deeper into this landscape, the quiet morning expands into the long view of history. The first agricultural communities appeared in these valleys more than 7,000 years ago, long before anyone uttered the word Dacian. Neolithic pottery styles, burial customs, and settlement layouts reveal thriving cultures that gently merged into the Bronze Age societies of the second millennium BCE. By the Iron Age, around the first millennium BCE, a recognizable cultural pattern emerges. Archaeologists have traced fortified settlements on hilltops, intricate metalwork, and ritual practices that begin to differentiate the ancestors of the Dacians from their Thracian kin to the south. These developments were not random. They arose from the demands of the landscape, fertile plains for crops, forests for wood, and game mountains rich with gold, silver, and salt. Salt, especially so abundant in the Carpathians, became an essential economic resource. Salt trails wound through the mountains like secret pathways, and in controlling them, certain tribes grew powerful. The mineral-fed herds preserved food and fueled trade networks that reached far beyond their borders. The mountains, with their hidden lodes of precious metals, added another layer of wealth. Dacian gold would one day draw the eye of Rome herself. The spiritual landscape. To understand the Dacians, one must also grasp the emotional and spiritual weight their geography carried. Ancient writers describe them as a people bound to the natural world, believing in gods who inhabited the sky, the earth, the mountains, and the storms. Everything around them, forest, rock, river, was alive with meaning. When archaeologists uncovered the sanctuaries of Sarmizegetusa Regia high in the Burebista Mountains, they found stone platforms and circular structures aligned with astronomical precision. These were not crude tribal shrines. They were observatories, temples, and ceremonial centers that reveal a sophisticated relationship between religion and landscape. The mountains offered both closeness to the sky and isolation from the mundane world, a fitting setting for rituals that sought wisdom, prophecy, and communion with the divine. Even the geography of their hill forts, strategically placed on elevated ridges, reflected a worldview in which height symbolized both power and sacredness. Paths of exchange and conflict. The land did not only protect, it invited movement. The Dacia corridor, the Olt Valley, and the river plains formed natural routes that brought traders, migrants, and invaders. Contact with the Greeks along the Black Sea coast introduced new goods and ideas. Later Celtic expansion left traces in weapon designs and artistic motifs. Steppe peoples brought innovations in cavalry warfare. By the time the first Dacian kingdoms formed, their culture was a tapestry woven from local tradition and foreign influence, yet unmistakably their own. Why geography mattered. Every feature of the land contributed to the character of the Dacian people. Mountains created defensive strength and spiritual depth. Rivers connected them to powerful neighbors while forming natural borders. Plains opened them to trade and conflict with steppe peoples. Mineral wealth gave them economic leverage and made them targets. This geography shaped not only daily life, but political destiny. When foreign empires rose, Persian, Macedonian, Roman, the Carpathians shielded the Dacians long enough for them to negotiate, resist, and sometimes even challenge the great powers. A transition into origins. As the sun fully breaks over the mountains, the mist dissolves, revealing field settlements and roads that hint at the people who once walked this land. Their story now emerges from the quiet dawn into clearer view. Children of the Thracian dawn. A pale mist clings to the slopes of an early Carpathian morning. The trees stand motionless, their trunks dark with dew, their crowns whispering faintly as a gentle wind passes through. In a quiet valley, a shepherd's fire smolders, sending a thin ribbon of smoke toward the sky. The sun has not yet risen over the ridge, and the world feels suspended, caught between night's lingering shadow and the promise of a new day. It is in this stillness, before the great kingdoms, before the wars and the monuments and the Roman legions, that the Dacians first take form. Not as an empire, not even as a unified people, but as part of a vast and ancient cultural horizon, stretching across the mountains and plains of southeastern Europe, the Thracian world. Their story, like the smoke rising in slow spirals into the morning air, begins softly, so softly, that the archaeological record whispers more than it shouts. A people of many tribes. To understand the Dacians, we must step back into the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age, when communities clustered around hilltops, river valleys, and fertile plains. At this time, the Thracians dominated a large region extending from the northern Aegean to the Carpathians. They were not a single nation, but a mosaic of tribes: Odrysians, Tribali, Besigetai, and many more, each with its own traditions, yet linked by language beliefs and shared cultural patterns. Ancient Greek authors, encountering them in trade or war, wrote of the Thracians with both admiration and fear. Herodotus called them one of the largest nations in the world, second only to the Indians. They appeared wild yet noble, gifted in music, skilled with horses, and fiercely independent. From this great Thracian tapestry, the Dacians slowly emerged. The birth of a distinct identity. For centuries, the people living in the Carpatho-Danubian region shared many traits with their southern Thracian cousins: similar pottery styles, weapon forms, burial rituals, and mythological motifs. Yet by around the first millennium BCE, the northern tribes began to diverge. Why scholars point to several converging forces. 1. Geographic separation. The Carpathian arc formed a natural enclosure, fertile, yet isolated, shielded, yet connected by river valleys. Over generations, this environment encouraged cultural cohesion among the tribes living within it. As communities grew more interconnected through trade intermarriage and shared defense, regional customs hardened into something distinct. 2. Contact with new influences. The northern Thracians, those who would become the Dacians and Getae, were uniquely positioned between worlds. To the west, Celtic migrants introduced ironworking upgrades and artistic styles. To the east, steppe nomads contributed mounted warfare traditions. To the south, Greek colonies on the Black Sea brought new goods, alphabetic writing, and religious ideas. These interactions enriched the northern tribes while pushing them culturally apart from their southern kin. 3. The rise of local power centers. Archaeology reveals the emergence of fortified hilltop settlements and regional leaders. Over time, these leaders solidified control over trade routes, metal resources, and fertile lands. Their authority produced a kind of political gravity. Smaller communities were drawn into spheres of influence that slowly shaped a collective Dacian identity. The Dacians and the Getae brothers, or twins. Ancient authors often wrote about two groups, the Dacians Dacoi and the Getae. Sometimes they treated them as distinct, sometimes they declared them one and the same. Herodotus considered the Getae the bravest and most just of the Thracians. Strabo and Cassius Dio, writing much later, insisted that the Dacians and Getae shared the same language and customs. Modern scholars largely agree the Dacians and Getae were branches of the same northern Thracian people, separated primarily by geography, the Getae living east toward the lower Danube and Black Sea, the Dacians centered in the Carpathian Mountains and Transylvania. Their shared culture appears in identical pottery forms, nearly indistinguishable weapon styles, similar burial customs, overlapping religious beliefs, especially the cult of Zalmoxis. Yet local variations existed shaped by contact with Greeks in the east and continental tribes in the west. Over time, these differences helped refine regional identities, but the core cultural fabric remained united. A language rooted in the Indo-European world. Though their language has vanished, its echoes remain in a few dozen words preserved by ancient authors, terms for plants, tools, social roles, and sacred concepts. Linguists classify Dacian as an Indo-European tongue close to Thracian, but not identical. Some propose that Dacian formed a northern dialect that branched off early. Others suggest a longer period of shared development with the Getae. Regardless of the exact classification, the language reflects deep roots in prehistoric Europe. It bore traces of common Indo-European pastoral vocabulary, terms related to mountainous landscapes, religious expressions tied to sky gods and ancestor veneration. This linguistic heritage supports the archaeological picture, a people shaped by the land, formed slowly through interaction with neighbors, and bonded by a worldview rooted in nature and kinship. Archaeological clues to ethnic evolution. What does the soil itself reveal about Dacian origins across Transylvania, Wallachia, and Moldavia? Excavations uncover fortified hilltop settlements, Davai. These early strongholds, often perched on steep ridges, served as proto-urban centers. Their uniform architectural features suggest a shared building tradition. Decorated metalwork. Dacian artisans crafted weapons, helmets, and jewelry displaying swirling curvilinear motifs, patterns reminiscent of Thracian art, yet distinct in execution. Burial customs, cremation, and inhumation coexisted, but grave goods reveal a culture that valued warriors, ritual specialists, and social elites. Ceramics. Local pottery styles show continuity over centuries, with subtle changes reflecting cultural evolution rather than abrupt disruption. Together, these threads form a tapestry that traces the slow emergence of a people who were neither entirely Thracian nor entirely separate, but something new shaped by centuries of interaction, adaptation, and isolation. The spiritual influence of ancestors. Identity for the Dacians was not only material, it was deeply spiritual. Their earliest myths, like those of other Thracians, spoke of a sky father deity, heroic ancestors, and sacred mountains. But in the northern regions, a unique religious figure would rise to prominence: Zalmoxis, a sage prophet or deified ancestor who promised immortality. The belief in the soul's endurance noted by Herodotus distinguished the northern Thracians. This idea, combined with ritual practices centered on mountain sanctuaries, became a defining spiritual marker, one that united scattered tribes under a common cosmology. Religion therefore acted as a cultural glue that pulled diverse clans into a shared sense of peoplehood. Why ethnic origin matters. Understanding how the Dacians emerged from the Thracian world is more than an academic exercise. It reveals how geography shapes culture, how interactions with neighbors redefine identity, how a people can remain rooted in tradition while evolving into something distinct. The Dacians were not born suddenly, nor carved from war alone. They were shaped by the slow currents of history, the land beneath their feet, and the ancient Thracian soul from which they arose, toward a clearer voice. As the morning light finally spills across the valley, illuminating stone grass, and the quiet hearth of the shepherd's fire, the Dacians step out from the haze of prehistory into sharper focus. They are no longer just northern Thracians. They are becoming a people with their own language, their own spiritual path, their own way of life. Tongue of the mountains. Morning settles gently over a mountain pass in the heart of ancient Dacia. The wind whispers along the ridgeline, stirring the tall grasses that cling to the slopes. As it moves, the air carries with it a strange and haunting music, an echo of shepherds calling across valleys, traders calling through the markets of distant Davy warriors, shouting their chants to the sky. This is the imagined soundscape of a language long vanished. No carved tablets endure, no epic poem has survived its fall, no alphabet was unquestionably its own. And yet the Dacian tongue shaped by the mountains, sharpened by contact with neighbors, preserved in fragments, through the pens of foreign writers, lives on in echoes, place names, plant names, and scattered words that sound like faint footsteps in a forgotten forest. Today the land is quiet, but if one listens closely, one might still detect the ghostly shapes of syllables drifting through the Carpathian air, as though the mountains themselves remember the language once spoken upon their slopes. A vanished voice rooted in the Indo-European family, scholars place the Dacian language within the great Indo-European family beside Greek, Latin, Celtic, Slavic, and Thracian. Yet where exactly it fits remains the subject of persistent debate. Some propose that Dacian was simply a northern Thracian dialect. Others argue for a more distinct branch, shaped by centuries of cultural isolation and unique regional influences. What we know for certain is limited but valuable. Dacian shared characteristics with other Indo-European tongues: consistent use of familiar roots for pastoral life, words related to agriculture, animals, and landscape, shared mythological vocabulary, evidence of inherited grammatical structures. But within these similarities lies divergence, small but significant signs that point to a language evolving according to its own internal logic. A language carved in fragments. Because the Dacians left no known texts, we must rely on fragments preserved by Greek and Roman authors. These fragments include glosses, short lists of Dacian words translated by ancient writers, often plants tools or titles. Among them, Dava fortress town, Drugeta, a kind of leader possibly linked to Indo-European wise strong roots, Sukon, a type of cloak, place names. Many toponyms survive across Transylvania and the lower Danube. Towns ending in Dava, Dawa, or Deva mark Dacian settlements: Sarmizegetusa, Regia, Burebista, Drobeta, Buridava. These endings indicate a linguistic pattern unique to the region: plant names. Ancient authors were fascinated by Dacian herbal knowledge. They recorded words for medicinal plants likely borrowed into Greek or Latin medical texts, such as brisa dita sciare and others. These terms hint at a richly developed botanical vocabulary tied to Dacian religious and healing practices. Personal names and tribal names. Kings such as Burebista and Decebalus reveal common linguistic roots, often with Indo-European components, meaning strong, victorious, or one who shines. These fragments, while small, allow scholars to reconstruct broad patterns. A mountain language, shaped by environment languages, reflect the landscapes where they form. In the case of Dacian, the vocabulary, preserved scarce though it is, suggests a people deeply connected to forests and mountains. Herodotus and Strabo wrote of the Dacians' mountain sanctuaries. Words for slopes, forests, and sky recur in linguistically reconstructed forms. Herbal medicine. The Dacians were famed for their healers, often described in ancient sources as mystics or priests. Their preserved plant names reflect not only knowledge of flora, but the ritual significance of herbal remedies. Pastoral life terms for sheep, cattle, and related tools appear in Indo-European parent structures, aligning with known Dacian economic patterns. Warfare and social structure, names of weapons, tribal leaders and warrior elites preserved in inscriptions and foreign reports suggest a vocabulary focused on hierarchy and martial skill. Even without full texts, a linguistic portrait emerges. The Dacian language was woven tightly into the rhythms of the land itself. Greek and Roman encounters with the Dacian tongue. To Greek travelers along the Black Sea coast, the Getae and Dacians sounded familiar yet foreign. Their speech, while related to Thracian, held enough differences to be noted. Roman authors in later centuries compared Dacian not only to Thracian, but to Illyrian and even early Baltic languages. Some modern linguists suggest remote connections between Dacian and the ancestors of Lithuanian or Latvian, though these ideas remain controversial. Meanwhile, inscriptions found in Dacian territories often use Greek or Latin letters to write names that were clearly foreign to those writing systems. These inscriptions on trade goods, tombstones, and pottery offer precious hints about Dacian phonetics and syllable structures. Did the Dacians have their own writing system? One of the greatest mysteries of Dacian culture is the question of writing. Ancient sources are contradictory. Some claim the Dacians wrote using Greek letters, others insist they had a native script. Archaeology has not yet uncovered definitive evidence of a Dacian alphabet, but intriguing clues exist. The Sinai tablets controversial. A set of lead plates inscribed with symbols and texts resembling an unknown script. Most scholars consider them modern forgeries, but some argue for an ancient origin. Their authenticity remains disputed. Graffiti on pottery shallow markings on ceramic vessels may represent signs or symbols, perhaps property marks or ritual codes, rather than true writing. Greek and Latin inscriptions. In areas of Greek trade influence, Dacian names occasionally appear written phonetically. These reflect not literacy among the Dacians broadly, but contact with literate neighbors. Ritual symbolism, decorative motifs, carved on votive objects, spirals, wolves, serpents, sun discs, may have functioned as sacred symbols rather than written language. Most scholars conclude that the Dacians did not possess a widespread writing system. Instead, they preserved history, law, and religion orally through priestly classes, bards and warriors who learned their traditions by heart. In this, they resembled early Celtic societies where memory and recitation were sacred arts. Why the language matters. Understanding the Dacian language, even in fragments, illuminates deeper truths. Identity. It confirms the Dacians as a distinct branch of the northern Thracian world. Culture. Their words reveal priorities: herbal knowledge, warcraft nature, sacred geography. Contact loanwords in neighboring languages show the flow of trade diplomacy and conflict. Legacy linguistic remnants influence the formation of early Romanian place names and possibly substratal elements in the Romanian language. The Dacian tongue did not vanish completely. It dissolved, absorbed by Latin after the Roman conquest, shaping the phonetics of early Romance dialects in the region. Beneath modern Romanian lie faint ancient echoes words, sounds, meanings that trace back to the Dacian world, toward the mystery of writing and symbol. As the wind passes again over the mountain pass, soft, cool, persistent, it seems to carry away the last hints of ancient speech. Yet the silence left behind is not empty. It invites a new question. If the Dacians spoke a vibrant Indo-European language, what symbols did they carve? What ritual signs did they leave behind? How did they record meaning without writing? Voices carved in stone and silver. The first light of dawn touches the crest of an old Dacian hill fort, revealing stone walls half buried in moss and soil. These are not the sharp geometric angles of Roman masonry. Instead, the stones lie in gentle arcs, following the curve of the ridge, placed with a craftsman's care and a mountain shepherd's instinct. A cold dew coats the ruins, catching the sunlight in small, scattered sparks. Beside the broken ramparts, a solitary column rises from the earth. Its sides are weathered and worn, its patterns nearly lost to time, but the delicate traces still visible, spirals, intersecting lines, stylized wolves, hint at a message the ages have almost erased. This is the paradox of the Dacians, a people without a known alphabet, a civilization that left no libraries, no chronicles, no codices, and yet a people whose artifacts speak in a visual language so distinct, so deliberate, that scholars have spent decades learning how to listen. In this silent dawn, we turn to the stones, the gold and the silver. For here, etched, carved, cast, and hammered, lie the voices of a culture that expressed meaning not through written text, but through symbol form and sacred geometry. A civilization of symbol rather than script. The Dacians may not have used a formal writing system, but their world was far from mute. Like the Celts of Western Europe or the Scythians of the steppe, they relied on memory, ritual specialists, and symbolic art to carry their traditions forward. The absence of texts. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of artifacts from the Dacian heartland tools, weapons, pottery, jewelry, sculptures, ritual objects, yet none contain strings of characters that form a known script. This absence is striking, especially when compared to contemporary civilizations that embraced writing early: the Greeks, Phoenicians, Persians, and Etruscans. Why did the Dacians remain unwritten? Perhaps writing was unnecessary in a society where priests, warriors, and nobles kept history alive orally. Perhaps their mountain sanctuaries and rituals held truths too sacred for ink and parchment. Or perhaps their writing simply has not survived a fragile system lost to time. Whatever the reason, Dacian communication flowed through symbolic expression rather than alphabetic form. The mystery of the Sinai tablets. No discussion of Dacian writing can avoid the Sinai tablets, a collection of lead plates bearing writings in an unknown script discovered under controversial circumstances in the late 19th century. Their authenticity remains fiercely debated. Arguments for authenticity. The script resembles no modern alphabet. The plates depict ancient Dacian fortresses and royal names. Some symbols echo known Dacian motifs. Arguments against. The lead appears modern in composition. The provenance is uncertain. Neshti. No similar artifacts have been found elsewhere. Most scholars consider the tablet's modern forgeries created perhaps as nationalistic enthusiasm surged in the 19th century. But the mystery remains unresolved enough that they continue to spark debates about whether the Dacians once possessed a formal script now lost to history. Graffiti marks and tokens. Certain pottery pieces bear incised symbols, simple marks scratched into clay before firing. These are not full writing systems. They may represent personal ownership symbols, workshop identifiers, religious signs, proto-writing elements devoid of grammatical structure. The symbols are too few and too varied to represent an alphabet. Yet they demonstrate that the Dacians used visual markers to convey identity or meaning. Sanctuaries as written landscapes nowhere. Is Dacian symbolism more powerful than in the sacred complex at Sarmizegetusa Regia, nestled deep in the Burebista Mountains? Here, stone terraces, wooden pillars, and circular sanctuaries formed a cosmic diagram, a sacred geometry aligned with astronomical events. The Great Circular Sanctuary. A ring of wooden posts encircled by stone walls, likely used for ritual and astronomical observation. Scholars have noted alignments with solstice sunrise, equinox shadows, markers for seasonal ceremonies. The layout itself functions as a text, a system of encoded knowledge about time, nature, and the cosmos. The andesite sun. A carved circular platform with radial spokes pointing toward cardinal directions. Its design recalls solar motifs found throughout Indo-European cultures but rendered in distinctly Dacian style. These structures speak of a priestly class trained in mathematics, astronomy, and ritual timing. Knowledge rather than written doctrine governed their ceremonies. Jewelry that tells stories. Dacian gold and silver work is renowned for its beauty, but the motifs engraved upon bracelets, pendants, and helmets do more than decorate, they communicate. The spirals, one of the most common Dacian symbols. Spirals represent eternity, cosmic cycles, the journey of the soul, the connection between earthly life and divine ascension. Their fluid curves appear on everything from shield ornaments to ceremonial cups. The wolf. A sacred animal possibly linked to a mythic protector spirit. The Dacian Draco, a dragon-like standard shaped as a wolf's head with a serpent's body, carried into battle, symbolized transformation, spiritual power, the voice of warriors calling through the metal mouth of the standard. The wolf motif appears carved, cast, and engraved across Dacian lands. The serpent. The serpent symbolized protection, wisdom, and rebirth. In Dacian art, serpents intertwine with spirals, suggesting cycles of life and immortality, key beliefs in Dacian cosmology. Ritual cups and helmets. Golden cups decorated with geometric patterns and helmets with embossed animal figures often depict scenes of ritual warfare and mythic struggle. They served not only as prestige items, but as carriers of cultural memory. Dacian architecture as cultural expression. Beyond small artifacts, the architecture itself carried symbolic meaning. Hill forts d'Ave. Often circular or oval in plan, these settlements emphasize curved lines rather than rigid grids. This reflects adaptation to terrain, a preference for organic forms, cultural emphasis on the cyclical and natural stone walls. Without mortar, dry stone construction required expertise and symbolized harmony with the landscape walls, built not by force but by understanding the shapes of stones. Terraced sanctuaries. These rising platforms mirrored the layered structure of the cosmos in Dacian belief, earthly realm below, celestial realm above. The oral tradition, a living archive. While symbolic art preserved rituals and beliefs, oral transmission kept history, law, and heroism alive. Dacian priests and nobles maintained genealogies, laws, ritual chants, prayers, epic narratives. Herodotus describes the Getai's belief in immortality, likely recited in poetic form by religious figures. Later Roman writers mention Dacian priests, capnobatai, those who walk in smoke interpreted as mystics who entered trance states to commune with gods. Without written texts, the spoken word became sacred. Why the visual language matters. The absence of a writing system does not reflect a lack of sophistication. Instead, visual symbolism conveyed complex religious ideas, architectural forms reflected cosmic order, artistry preserved collective memory, oral tradition ensured the continuity of culture. The Dacians communicated meaning not through written characters, but through a rich symbolic vocabulary imprinted upon every object they created, toward the sacred world of faith and ritual. As dawn brightens over the hill fort, the carved column stands silent, but not empty. Its spirals, its animal figures, its geometric patterns all bear witness to a people who express their deepest beliefs through line, curve, and form. The sacred breath faiths of sky and serpent. A pale twilight settles over the Dacian Mountains. The air is still scented with pine resin and the cold sweetness of high-altitude night. Far above, the first stars shimmer through fading bands of blue. In a hidden clearing, stone pillars cast long shadows across a terraced sanctuary. Their forms weathered yet deliberate circle a central altar where priests once knelt, where warriors sought blessings, where kings listened to the whispers of the divine. Here in this quiet place between earth and sky, the Dacians communed with their gods. They did not build monumental pyramids or inscribe sacred laws onto tablets. Their temples were unroofed, their rituals unfolded in silence, broken by chant and drum. Their offerings were given to windfire and water, and their faith, profound, mystic, and disciplined, shaped the identity of an entire people. Tonight, the past feels close. As the stars gather above the sanctuary, the spiritual world of the Dacians awakens from the dusk. A religion rooted in nature. The Dacians were a people of the mountains, and their spirituality reflected the land around them. They saw divinity woven through all things: trees, stones, rivers, storms. Unlike the structured pantheons of Greece or Rome, the Dacian gods blended abstraction with embodiment, merging cosmic forces with mythic personalities. Key features of Dacian spirituality: nature as sacred space temples were often open to the sky. Mountains served as sanctuaries. Caves symbolized entry into the underworld. A priestly elite. The Ctistai and Capnobatai, described by ancient authors, were spiritual leaders skilled in meditation ritual and herbal knowledge. Belief in immortality. One of the defining traits of Dacian faith was the conviction that the soul survived death, a concept Greek writers found remarkable. Ritual simplicity paired with sacred geometry. Stone circles, terraces, and sun-aligned structures formed a sacred landscape designed for contemplation and celestial observation. Their religion was less a set of doctrines and more a way of perceiving the world, a quiet reverence for natural forces intertwined with a belief in inner transformation. The enigmatic Zalmoxis, god, prophet, or deified ancestor. At the center of Dacian religion stands Zalmoxis, one of the most mysterious figures of ancient Europe. Who was Zalmoxis? Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described Zalmoxis as once a human slave of Pythagoras, later a sage who returned to his people, a teacher who preached immortality, a figure who vanished into an underground chamber only to reappear years later. But other ancient authors contradict him. Some depict Zalmoxis as a full-fledged deity, others as a mythic founder. Modern scholars propose he may have been a historical priest-king, a reformer of spiritual practices, an elevated ancestor figure, a sky god embodying death and rebirth. Whatever his origin, Zalmoxis shaped Dacian belief profoundly. The promise of immortality. The Getae, close kin of the Dacians, told Greek sailors that they did not fear death because they believed their souls would join Zalmoxis in the afterlife. This belief impressed and puzzled outsiders. It marked the Dacians as unusual among Indo-European peoples. This promise of immortality was no mere comfort. It forged courage, discipline, and social unity. Warriors fought with conviction. Priests cultivated inner calm. Kings ruled under the guidance of spiritual advisors who interpreted divine will. Rituals of communication. With Zalmoxis. Herodotus recounts a strange ritual every few years. The Dacians would choose a messenger, sometimes through lottery, sometimes through merit, and hurl him into the air, caught by spears held below. If he died swiftly, the gods accepted the message. If he survived, he was deemed unworthy. Whether literal or exaggerated, the story reveals a potent truth: the Dacians believed in direct communication with the divine. Other gods in the Dacian pantheon. Though Zalmoxis dominated their spiritual worldview, the Dacians honored numerous deities tied to natural forces. Gebelesis, a sky and storm god, associated with lightning. Some believed Zalmoxis and Gebelesis were the same figure under different aspects: storm and serenity, destruction and renewal. Bendis, a goddess of the moon forests and hunting. Adopted into Greek religion in Thrace and Attica, she symbolized feminine power, night rituals, wild nature. Her cult likely extended into Dacian territories reflecting shared Thracian heritage. Darzalus, a chthonic god of health, abundance, and the underworld, associated with healing powers, prosperity, the continuity of life through death. He appears in reliefs holding cornucopia-like symbols. The Great Mother. Though unnamed archaeological evidence suggests the worship of a mother goddess linked to fertility, earth, and seasonal cycles. Sacred animals. Wolves, serpents, stags, and eagles appear frequently in Dacian art, each carrying mythic and shamanic significance. Ritual practices and priesthood. The Dacian priesthood served as spiritual guides, healers, and advisors. Their roles intertwined religious, medical, and political functions. The Kapnobatai, those who walk in smoke. These priests entered trance-like states, possibly using incense, fermented herbal brews, rhythmic chanting, controlled breathing. They mediated between human and divine realms. Sacred fasting and purification. Priests often practiced fasting before ceremonies. Purification through cold mountain water was common. The ritual use of herbs. Dacian healers became legendary for their herbal knowledge. Mediterranean physicians borrowed terms for plants from Dacian languages, a rare honor. Communal feasts and offerings. Ceremonial feasts symbolized unity. Offerings of grain, wine, honey, and fruit were placed on stone altars, often aligned with solar events. Burial customs, cremation and inhumation, both appear in the region. Grave goods suggest belief in an afterlife, respect for warriors, spiritual roles for certain individuals. The presence of amulets, spirals, and engraved items in graves reflects a belief in symbolic protection beyond death. Sacred sites, the mountain temples. The most impressive expression of Dacian religion lies in their mountain sanctuaries. Sarmizegetusa, Regia, the spiritual and political heart of Dacia. Its terraces held solar sanctuaries, circular temples, stone altars, observatories. The precision of these constructions shows advanced knowledge of geometry and astronomy. Kogaionon, the Holy Mountain. Ancient authors refer to a sacred mountain where Zalmoxis dwelled. Scholars debate its location. Some place it near the Bucegi Mountains, others within the Orashti Range. Regardless of its exact site, Kogaionon represents the Dacian belief in mountain summits as bridges to the divine, a religion that shaped a nation. Dacian spirituality was not merely ritual, it was the philosophical foundation of their society. Courage in war. Belief in immortality gave Dacian warriors their famed fearlessness. Unity of tribes, shared rituals and mountain sanctuaries bonded distant communities into a collective identity. Political authority. Kings derived legitimacy from their connection to the priesthood. Spiritual power and temporal rule were intertwined. Resilience against conquest. Even after the Roman conquest, Dacian religious symbols persisted, merging subtly with Roman practices and surviving in folk traditions long after temples fell, toward the formation of a kingdom. As the last star clears the horizon and the sanctuary fades into the morning's first glow, the Dacian faith stands revealed as the heartbeat of their culture, shaping their courage, their kings, and their dreams of eternity. Seeds of a kingdom. The dawn unfolds slowly across the highlands of Transylvania. Thin layers of fog drift through oak groves and across grassy ridges, softening the sharp edges of hilltop fortresses, barely visible in the early light. Smoke rises from scattered hearths far below shepherd fires, morning meals sparks of human presence in a land still half asleep. These are not yet cities, not yet the centers of a unified state. They are fragments, tribal strongholds guarded by wooden palisades, clusters of homes clinging to hillside settlements, bound together by kinship river routes and the quiet rhythm of the seasons. But within these fragments, something is stirring, a movement toward unity, a transformation from an array of tribes into the beginnings of a kingdom. Before the great rulers, before Burebista, before Decebalus, the Dacians lived in a world defined by local chiefs, scattered communities, and shifting alliances. Yet, through centuries of contact, conflict, and cultural evolution, these disparate peoples would gradually knit themselves into a coherent society capable of resisting even the greatest empire of the ancient world. This is the story of how a kingdom was born, slowly, unevenly, but with a strength rooted deep in the Carpathian soil. Tribal foundations. The early Dacian world. The earliest Dacian political structure was tribal. Each tribe, some small, some expansive, occupied a territory defined by our mountain ridges, river valleys, access to mineral wealth, fertile pastures. These tribes were ruled by local chiefs, often warrior leaders whose authority rested on personal prestige, familial ties, and control of fortified settlements known as Dacia. What united the tribes? Though independent, these communities shared a common language, religious beliefs centered around Zalmoxis and sacred mountains, similar burial customs, trade networks linking them to one another, mutual defense against steppe raiders. These cultural bonds laid the groundwork for political unity long before any king attempted it. Hill forts, the political nucleus. The Dacian hill forts, strategically placed on mountain slopes, were more than military posts. They were early proto-urban centers where tribal councils met, rituals were held, and goods were stored. Examples such as Kostest Kapulna and Blidaru show stone walls using the Murus Daciacus technique, terraces supporting granaries and workshops, sanctuaries placed at elevated points, streets or walkways adapted to the terrain. Within these centers, leadership evolved. Chiefs became nobles, the Terabastes distinguished by tall felt hats and elaborate jewelry. Beneath them were the free commoners and artisans, the comati who formed the backbone of Dacian society. This stratification did not weaken unity, it strengthened it by giving tribes a hierarchy that could scale into broader political structures. Trade as a catalyst for political growth. The Dacian lands sat at the crossroads of ancient trade routes, bringing in goods from Greek colonies along the Black Sea, Celtic tribes of Central Europe, Scythian and Sarmatian steppe cultures. Roman merchants from the Danube frontier trade fostered wealth. Salt iron, silver, and gold made the region economically powerful. Cultural integration, imported pottery, wine, amphorae, and weapons carried ideas as well as goods. Intertribal alliances, shared economic interests, encouraged cooperation, and reduced internal conflict. From this growing web of exchange, regional leaders emerged, men capable of commanding not only warriors, but economic networks. The influence of warfare conflict, too, played its part in shaping unity. Steppe raiders, Scythians, and later Sarmatians periodically swept into the plains. Their horsemen were swift and deadly, prompting Dacian tribes to coordinate defenses. Celtic incursions. Celtic tribes penetrated Transylvania in the 4th–3rd centuries BCE, leaving behind fortified settlements and weapons. While initially adversarial, this contact introduced new military technologies and tactics. Greco-Macedonian campaigns. Alexander the Great's northern campaigns and later Macedonian expeditions reached Thracian lands. Though not directly conquering Dacia, these pressures forced northern tribes to adopt stronger political cohesion. Warfare created heroes, charismatic leaders whose reputations extended beyond a single tribe. These figures acted as prototypes for later kings. The emergence of regional power centers. By the 3rd–2nd centuries BCE, certain tribes rose above others in strength and influence. Archaeological evidence points to fortified complexes with increasing complexity, specialized workshops for metalworking, elite residences with imported goods, sanctuaries that served as cultural unifiers. These centers suggest a move toward centralized authority as leaders consolidated control over trade routes, mineral resources, and local alliances. The rise of the kingship concept. Before the formal Dacian kingdom, leadership evolved gradually from chieftainship to something more hierarchical. How kingship emerged war leaders, gaining prestige. Successful military leaders became respected figures whose authority extended beyond their clan. Religious authority leaders often collaborated closely with the priesthood, gaining spiritual legitimacy. Control of wealth. Salt mines, gold deposits, and trade hubs allowed certain men to gather personal wealth, fueling political growth. Intertribal alliances, marriage diplomacy, and mutual defense pacts gradually pointed toward larger federations. By the time Burebista appears in the historical record, the social and economic structures needed for a kingdom were already in place. Society and daily life. A foundation for statehood unity does not arise from leaders alone. It grows from the daily lives of ordinary people. Agriculture, Dacians cultivated wheat and barley, millet, vines and fruit orchards. Granaries supported population growth and long campaigns. Pastoralism, sheep-goats, and cattle formed the economic base of many tribes. Craftsmanship, Dacian artisans produced fine ceramics, intricately decorated metalwork, weapons and armor. Workshops in major davai suggest increasing specialization, a mark of proto-urban society. Social structure. The division between nobles and commoners formalized political roles. Tarabostes, nobility, warriors, priests, administrators, commodity commoners, farmers, herders, artisans, slaves or semi-dependent people, war captives or debtors. This layered society mirrored the emerging political hierarchy of a kingdom, religious unity as a political bond. As explored in the previous part, Dacian spirituality was a powerful unifying force. The belief in Zalmoxis, Shared rituals and mountain sanctuaries linked tribes spiritually long before they were tied politically. Priestly elites played a key role in early political formation, advising leaders, mediating disputes, legitimizing alliances, administering sacred ceremonies. Religion offered a shared identity that transcended tribal boundaries. External pressure, the Roman factor. The Roman Republic's expansion into the Balkans during the 2nd–1st centuries BCE exerted enormous pressure on northern tribes. Roman governors in Macedonia and Moesia launched campaigns that brushed against Dacian borders. The sight of Roman legions disciplined, relentless, technologically advanced, likely accelerated the push for unity. Defeat was possible. Subjugation was possible, unless the tribes became something more than disparate communities. It was in this context of opportunity and threat that the seeds of a kingdom began to sprout. Toward the first great king, by the late 2nd century BCE, the Dacian lands were primed for unification. The conditions were set: established trade networks, fortified political centers, rising noble classes, shared spiritual beliefs, external dangers demanding cooperation. Soon, a leader would emerge who could harness these forces, forge alliances, and build the first Dacian kingdom. The dawn of Dacian statehood was near. Transition to the Age of Burebista. As the morning light intensifies over the tribal lands, revealing hill forts, sacred terraces, and paths, worn deep by generations, the Dacians stand on the threshold of transformation. Their society, once fragmented, is ready for a leader of rare vision and power. The Age of Burebista. A fire crackles beneath a dark Transylvanian sky. Pine logs hiss softly as resin meets flame, and a warm glow spreads across the faces of warriors gathered in a circle. Their bronze weapon fittings glimmer, their cloaks ripple gently in the night breeze. Behind them, banners crowned with the Dacian Draco wolf-head serpent body flutter like living creatures. At the center of the gathering stands a man whose presence holds the circle in absolute stillness. His name is Burebista. To later historians, he would be the first true king of the Dacians, the one who shaped scattered tribes into a unified realm, who carved a state where none had existed before, who raised Dacia from the anonymity of fragmented chiefdoms to the status of a regional power feared by kings and republics alike. Tonight, though, he is simply a leader, addressing his people beneath the sacred sky. Yet every word he speaks will ripple outward across the Carpathian world, altering the course of history. For the Age of Burebista is the moment when the seeds of unity sprout into a formidable kingdom, strong, disciplined, and imbued with spiritual purpose. A turbulent world in transition. The 1st century BCE was a time of upheaval across the Balkans and the lower Danube. The Roman Republic was expanding, its legions pressed deep into Macedonia and Thrace. Its governors sought influence over tribal confederations, its generals hungry for glory-eyed new frontiers. Celtic power was weakening. Once dominant Celtic tribes in Pannonia and the Carpathian Basin were fragmenting, absorbed, or displaced by new forces. Scythians and Sarmatians exerted pressure from the east. Greek colonies along the Black Sea, Thomas, Histria, Calatis, struggled to survive. Into this shifting landscape stepped Burebista, a leader of extraordinary talent whose rise coincided with the perfect moment for consolidation. The reformer king, a new order. Among the tribes, Burebista's first achievement was internal, not external. He undertook a sweeping reorganization of Dacian society, one that would lay the foundation for a centralized kingdom, unification of tribes through diplomacy, strategic marriages, force of personality, and selective use of military might. Burebista united numerous tribes, those in Transylvania, those along the Mureş, the powerful groups in southern and eastern Dacia, the Getic communities along the lower Danube. What had been loosely connected, cultural cousins became political allies under a single authority. Strengthening of the nobility. The Tarabastes, Dacian nobles, became the backbone of governance. Burebista elevated their status, granting them roles as regional governors, military commanders, administrators of trade, guardians of sanctuaries. This created a ruling class invested in the stability of the realm, reforms of conduct and discipline. Ancient sources note Burebista's moral and military reforms. Strabo writes that he cleansed the Dacians of excess and vice. This likely refers to a campaign against drunkenness, internal feuds, lawlessness, rival power centers. The Dacians emerged from these reforms more disciplined, better organized, and more unified. Collaboration with the priesthood, Burebista's closest advisor, was said to be Dacians, a high priest of great influence. Dacians helped implement religious reforms, astronomical and mathematical teachings, moral codes, standardized rituals. Religion and state became inseparable, strengthening Burebista's authority through spiritual legitimacy. Political and military expansion. Once internal unity was secured, Burebista turned outward. His conquests were swift and sweeping, one of the most remarkable expansions in Eastern European antiquity. Celtic dominance. Broken. He crushed the remaining Celtic tribes in the Carpathian Basin, eliminating a centuries-old rival. Archaeological layers show abrupt destruction of Celtic centers, signaling the rise of Dacian power. Black Sea cities brought into influence. Greek colonies along the Black Sea coast, Thomas Calatis Odessos, fell under Burebista's sway. Some submitted willingly, others were compelled. This gave Dacia access to maritime trade, Greek artisans, and valuable imports. Thracian and Illyrian territories touched by his power. Burebista's influence extended far beyond modern Romania, reaching eastern and central Slovakia, parts of Hungary, northern Bulgaria, pockets of Moldova and Ukraine. His realm became one of the largest ever constructed in the region. Rome takes notice. Just decades earlier, Dacia had been little more than a collection of mountain tribes. Under Burebista, it became a kingdom that the Roman Republic could not ignore. Roman envoys traveled north. Reports reached the Senate describing a new threat rising beyond the Danube. Burebista, through unity, reform, and conquest, had placed Dacia on the geopolitical map, a rival to Julius Caesar. Around 44 BCE, two names echoed across the ancient world: Julius Caesar, dictator of Rome; Burebista, king of the Dacians. Their paths were set on a collision course. Caesar planned a massive campaign to conquer Dacia. His intentions are recorded in ancient sources that note the strategic threat of Dacian power, the wealth of the Carpathian mines, the importance of securing the Danube frontier. Rumors that Burebista supported Pompey Caesar's rival, the Roman legions, prepared. Burebista's armies stood ready. The stage was set for a war that could have reshaped the ancient world. But fate intervened. 44 BCE, a year of assassinations. In the same year, Julius Caesar was murdered on the Ides of March. Burebista was assassinated shortly thereafter, likely by internal rivals. Two great leaders fell, and the war that might have changed the region forever never came. The coincidence is striking: two giants removed from history within months, leaving power vacuums in their wake. The fragmentation of Burebista's kingdom, with Burebista's death unity, unraveled. His large empire split into several smaller units, each ruled by regional kings. Among these were the kingdom of Cotiso, the territories of Dacian nobles in the Orashti Mountains, various tribal domains from the Muresh to the Olt. This fragmentation demonstrated that the unity Burebista created, though powerful, was still fragile, dependent heavily on his charisma and leadership. Yet the idea of Dacia as a unified kingdom had taken root. It would not die. Over time, it would re-emerge stronger and more focused under future rulers. The legacy of Burebista, even after the kingdom splintered, Burebista's impact endured. He created the first true Dacian state. This structure set the stage for all future political developments. He established Dacia as a major power. Rome now viewed the region as a frontier requiring constant monitoring. He strengthened religious unity. The bond between ruler and priesthood became central to Dacian governance. He built fortified centers and economic networks. Many hill forts expanded during his reign remained vital for decades. He forged a national identity. Through reform, conquest, and vision, Burebista turned tribes into a people. Toward the next great ruler, as the fire at the ritual gathering burns low and dawn begins to brighten the sky, the age of Burebista recedes like smoke. Yet its imprint remains etched into the land. The Dacians, though fragmented, would rise again. Another leader, brilliant, determined, and destined for legend, would gather the tribes. His name would echo even louder in Roman chronicles. Fractures after greatness. A stillness hangs over the Carpathian heights. The morning sky is pale, almost colorless, as if drained by the weight of years. On a narrow ridge overlooking a deep valley, the ruins of a fortress cling to the stone walls, once ordered and proud, now scattered like broken teeth across the cliffside. Grass pushes through cracks in the masonry. A lone hawk circles overhead, its cry echoing through the empty courtyards. This is what remains of the world after Burebista. Where once a unified kingdom stretched across rivers and mountains, now lie fragments, shattered pieces of a vision, too grand, too young, too dependent on the man who shaped it. The smoke of ritual gatherings has faded. The banners of a united Dacia have fallen still. But from within this quiet, a new chapter begins to form. For kingdoms are not merely born in triumph. They are forged again and again in the fires of collapse, ambition, and renewal. The era after Burebista, an age of division, rivalry, and shifting power, is essential to understanding how the Dacians would one day rise under another king, Decebalus, to challenge Rome with renewed force. Before the next great ascent, there must first be descent. This is the story of fracture and the stubborn endurance that followed. The shattering of a kingdom. Burebista's assassination in 44 BCE sent immediate shockwaves through the newly formed Dacian state, a kingdom held by one man. His empire had been vast but young. Its unity was not yet institutional. It rested heavily on his charisma, his alliances, his reforms, his authority over nobles and priests. Without him, the delicate balance collapsed. Division into regional kingdoms. Ancient sources describe the kingdom splitting into as many as 4 or 5 successor realms. These were ruled by powerful nobles or former generals who saw opportunity in the vacuum. The most prominent among them was Cotiso, a leader whose domain lay in the southwestern regions near the Dacia and the lower Muresh. Other territories fell under lesser-known rulers, creating a political landscape suddenly complicated and unstable. Rivalries and suspicion. The nobles, once aligned under Burebista's unifying hand, now pursued their own ambitions, competing for resources, forming local alliances, forging uneasy relations with Rome, occasionally clashing in open conflict. The priesthood, too, found itself divided. Without a central king, its influence fractured along regional lines, weakening the spiritual unity that had underpinned Burebista's reforms. The Romans moved closer. Rome, still reeling from Caesar's death, did not immediately march north. Internal wars between Mark Antony Octavian and the remnants of the Republic absorbed attention. But even as Dacia fractured, Rome was watching. Cotiso and Rome. Cotiso quickly rose as the most powerful among the divided kings. Roman sources mention him in potential diplomatic arrangements. According to one tradition, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, considered marrying Cotiso's daughter. Cotiso himself was offered a Roman bride. These negotiations suggest that Rome sought influence through diplomacy rather than war, recognizing Cotiso as a useful buffer in the turbulent Danubian frontier. Border conflicts and raids. Yet the frontier remained volatile. Skirmishes erupted between Dacian forces and Roman garrisons stationed in Moesia. Raids crossed the Danube in both directions. Alliances shifted quickly as local Dacian rulers weighed advantage over unity. Rome learned to exploit this division. It supported certain chieftains over others, sent gifts, made threats, and intervened militarily when convenient. Every fracture in Dacia strengthened the Roman hand. Cultural flourishing amid disorder. Yet fragmentation did not mean decline in every aspect. In fact, archaeological evidence reveals that this period saw significant cultural flourishing in certain regions. Art and metalwork. Dacian craftsmen continued producing ornate bracelets, fibulae, decorated weapon fittings, ritual vessels. These works often exhibit even greater regional variation than before, reflecting increasing local identity. Construction of fortresses. Many hill forts, notably those in the Burebista Mountains, were expanded or rebuilt during this time. Their architecture refined the Murus Dacicus technique, laying the groundwork for the monumental fortifications of the next century. Trade with Rome and Hellenistic cities. Despite political instability, trade intensified. Roman imports wine ceramics, glassware, exports metalwork, grain, salt livestock. Even divided the Dacians were economically interconnected with the ancient world. The rise of new regional powers. Over the decades after Burebista's death, several regional rulers rose and fell. While the historical record is patchy, archaeology helps illuminate the shifting landscape. The Western Kingdoms. In the Banat and Western Transylvania fortified centers suggest the presence of strong local dynasts who maintained robust defenses against Roman expansion and steppe incursions. The Eastern Getae. Along the lower Danube, Getic rulers developed complex relations with Rome, sometimes allies, sometimes adversaries. Their exposure to Greek and Roman culture produced hybrid artistic styles and increased literacy. The heartland of the Burebista Mountains. This region, future seat of Sarmizegetusa, Regia, appears to have preserved the deepest continuity with Burebista's reforms. Sanctuaries remained active. Nobles maintained traditional dress. Mountain fortresses grew in size and complexity. Even in fragmentation, the spiritual and political core of Dacia endured the strain of external threats. While internal ambitions divided the kingdom, external forces applied relentless pressure. Sarmatian encroachment. Sarmatian tribes from the east moved into the plains between the Carpathians and the Dniester. Their heavy cavalry posed a new tactical challenge, forcing Dacian leaders to adapt defenses. Roman consolidation under Augustus Rome stabilized the Balkans. Moesia became a formal province. Legions fortified the Danube. Diplomatic missions were sent north. Rome now formed a solid wall along Dacia's southern border. Germanic groups to the west and north. Smaller migrations or incursions by Germanic peoples added pressure on western Dacian groups, disrupting trade and prompting new alliances. A culture waiting for renewal. Despite the fractures, the essential elements of Dacian civilization survived. Religion mountain sanctuaries continued to operate, preserving ritual traditions, and the cult of Zalmoxis. Social structure. The noble class remained influential, though now more localized in its power. Warfare expertise. Dacian weaponry and tactics evolved, adopting heavy cavalry elements, improving fortifications, and mastering guerrilla warfare. Economic strength, gold salt forests, and fertile lands allowed Dacian territories to maintain economic vitality even without unity. The idea of a Dacian kingdom once made real by Burebista did not disappear. It lingered, waiting for a new leader to restore what had been lost. Toward the rise of Decebalus, in the decades that followed, the Dacian political landscape slowly began to contract toward the Orasti Mountains. Out of the competing rulers, a pattern of consolidation emerged. Fortresses grew larger. Nobles aligned under fewer chiefs. The priesthood regained influence. Diplomacy with Rome intensified. By the late 1st century CE, the stage was set for a revival of central authority. Soon a leader would rise whose name would eclipse all others, one who would reunite the tribes, modernize the army, fortify the mountains, and confront the might of the Roman Empire itself. That leader was Decebalus. Transition to the era of Decebalus. As the morning sun climbs over the ruins of the old fortress, its light falls on stones laid centuries ago, stones placed in the age of Burebista and left standing through the era of fracture. Their endurance mirrors the resilience of the Dacian people. Fragmentation could weaken them, but it could not break them. Decebalus' ascendant dawn creeps over the Orasti Mountains with a muted amber glow. Fog clings to the forested slopes, drifting in pale ribbons between the trunks of ancient pines. High above the valley floor, the terraces of Sarmizegetusa Regia, once quiet, once fractured by rivalries, begin to stir with renewed purpose. The soft sounds of hammers echo through the crisp air as craftsmen shape stone into fortification blocks. Warriors drilled in the open courtyards, their breaths rising in the cold. Priests move along the sacred terraces, murmuring prayers to Zalmoxis in the hushed cadence of morning ritual. Something is changing. From the slow work of rebuilding from decades of fragmentation and instability, a new leader has emerged, a man whose intelligence, resilience, and political insight will restore the Dacian kingdom to its former strength. His name will echo through the annals of Rome with fear and respect. Decebalus, a king whom Roman historians described as most skilled in the arts of both war and peace, a strategist whose understanding of terrain diplomacy and psychological warfare confounded even the mighty imperial machine. This is the dawn of his ascent. A kingdom in need of renewal. By the second half of the 1st century CE, the cracks left by Burebista's death had not entirely healed. Rome's shadow had grown long across the Danube. The empire, now powerful, organized, and ambitious, had fortified the frontier and was pushing northward. The Dacians needed unity. They needed a leader capable of restoring political cohesion, reforming military forces, negotiating with the Romans when wise, resisting them when necessary. Into this moment stepped Decebalus, rising first as a noble of great influence, then as a commander, and finally as king. Archaeological and written sources suggest that his ascent was not sudden but gradual, shaped by both opportunity and crisis. The road to power. While details of Decebalus's early life are scarce, historians reconstruct his rise from clues in Roman accounts and Dacian developments. A time of shifting leaders. Several rulers appear in the historical record before Decebalus's reign, including Duras who likely served as king or senior noble. Other local dynasts who controlled portions of the heartland. Decebalus may have served initially as a military commander under Duras, earning distinction in campaigns along the Danube. The fire of war. The turning point came when Dacian forces clashed with Rome under Emperor Domitian in the 80s CE. In these confrontations, Decebalus distinguished himself through tactical brilliance, mastery of mountain warfare, bold raids, clever use of negotiation, and deception. It was likely following these conflicts, particularly the Dacian victory of 85 to 86 CE, that Decebalus rose to prominence. A strategic transition of power. Roman sources indicate that Decebalus became king around 87 CE, with Duras stepping aside peacefully. This suggests that the nobles and priesthood recognized Decebalus as the leader capable of confronting Rome's growing power. And so a new era began, the mind of a statesman. Decebalus was no mere warrior. The Romans describe him as shrewd in diplomacy, cunning in exploiting enemy weaknesses, intelligent in engineering and negotiation, charismatic in leadership, relentless in resistance. Cassius Dio wrote that Decebalus knew how to raise the spirits of his allies and terrify his enemies. He was a king who blended force with strategy, tradition with adaptation, rebuilding the Dacian army. Upon taking power, Decebalus quickly reformed and strengthened Dacia's military apparatus. Expansion of fortifications. He reinforced and expanded the network of hill forts in the Age Mountains, including Sarmizegetusa Regia, Kostest, Blidaru, Pietraroșie. These fortresses, constructed using the Murus Daciacus technique, combined stone and timber with remarkable durability. Their elevated positions provided natural surveillance and strong defensive lines. Improved weaponry. Decebalus encouraged improvements in iron working, sword forging, armor production, siege defenses. Dacian falx wielders, armed with the deadly two-handed curved blade, became feared by Roman soldiers. Integration of cavalry, influenced by Sarmatian tactics, Decebalus expanded Dacia's cavalry, turning it into a fast-moving force capable of raiding Roman positions or countering legionary advances. 4. Guerrilla warfare expertise. He mastered the art of using narrow passes, forested hills, ambush sites, deceptive retreats. These tactics allowed smaller Dacian forces to outmaneuver larger Roman armies. Diplomatic genius, playing Rome against itself. One of Decebalus's greatest strengths was his ability to use diplomacy to buy time, gain resources, and strengthen his kingdom. The peace with Domitian. After winning significant victories during the First Dacian War, 85-89 CE, Decebalus negotiated a peace treaty highly favorable to Dacia. Rome paid Dacia annual subsidies. Rome provided engineers and craftsmen. Rome supplied tools and weapons. In effect, Rome, his enemy, helped rebuild his kingdom. This arrangement infuriated many in the Roman Senate, who viewed it as an embarrassment for the empire. Yet Domitian, needing stability on the frontier, agreed. Influence among neighboring tribes, Decebalus forged alliances with Sarmatians, Roxolani, Germanic tribes, local ghetto Dacian groups. He understood that Rome preferred isolated enemies, so he made sure Dacia would never stand alone. Manipulating negotiation and hostility. He alternated between peaceful gestures and subtle provocations, ensuring that Rome remained cautious while Dacia grew stronger. Intellectual and engineering achievements. Roman accounts, especially those from Trajan's era, reveal that Decebalus encouraged engineering projects that impressed even Roman observers. Hydraulic works, Sarmizegetusa, Regia, featured sophisticated water management systems, including aqueducts made of hollowed tree trunks bound with iron. These ensured fresh water during sieges, sanitation within the fortress, sustainable living quarters. Storage infrastructure, granaries, and armories were expanded to support long-term resistance against Roman legions. Secret escape routes. Some fortresses appear to have included hidden corridors or exit tunnels, likely constructed under Decebalus's direction. These innovations indicate a leader preparing for inevitable confrontation. A kingdom reborn. Under Decebalus, Dacia regained much of the unity it had lost after Burebista. Religious unity. The priesthood regained influence, sanctuaries were revitalized, and rituals honoring Zalmoxis continued to bind the tribes. Economic strength mining operations intensified, especially gold, silver, and iron. Trade with neighboring regions flourished. Cultural confidence. Dacian art blossomed anew. Spiral motifs, animal symbolism, ceremonial objects, all merged into a style that grew increasingly distinctive. A renewed identity was forming, woven from tradition, but shaped by the pressures of empire. Toward the first clash with Trajan, but beneath the hope and resurgence lay a growing shadow. Rome had a new emperor, one far more disciplined, ambitious, and capable than Domitian. His name was Trajan. Where Domitian tolerated Dacian strength, Trajan saw a threat to be eliminated. The Dacian king, who had outwitted Roman diplomacy, now faced an emperor determined to crush his kingdom with overwhelming force. The greatest war Dacia had ever faced was coming. Transition to the First Roman-Dacian War. As the morning sun rises fully over Sarmizegetusa Regia, the rebuilt fortresses gleam with renewed strength. Warriors drill beneath the watchful eyes of commanders. Priests trace sacred motions over altars. Messengers ride across valleys, carrying news of Roman movements. Decebalus stands at the center of it all, calm, analytical, resolute. The kingdom he restored is ready, but so is Rome. The First War with Rome. A gray dawn settles over the Danube frontier. The river lies broad and silent beneath a low sky, its surface broken only by drifting reeds and the occasional ripple of a swimming bird. On the southern bank, the silhouettes of Roman watchtowers rise above the mist, rigid, disciplined, geometric. On the northern bank, faint shapes move among the trees. Scouts shadows the early stirrings of a people preparing for war. The air feels heavy, as though the land itself anticipates the storm to come. For decades, tension has simmered along this frontier. Now, with the rise of a formidable Dacian king and a Roman emperor determined to secure his borders, the Danube stands on the brink of violence. The First Dacian War, fought between 85 and 89 CE, was not merely a border conflict. It was the opening chapter in a struggle between two worlds, two visions of power, two leaders whose decisions would shape the future of Eastern Europe. And on this quiet morning, before the thunder of battle begins, the land waits. The provocation. The spark that ignited the First Dacian War was more than a random raid, it was a calculated strike. In 85 CE, Dacian forces crossed the Danube and attacked Roman fortifications in Moesia. Whether Decebalus himself ordered the assault or whether it came from a regional commander acting independently remains debated. What is certain is this: Roman garrisons were overwhelmed. The governor of Moesia, Appius Sabinus, was killed. Roman territory was destabilized. To Rome, such an act demanded retaliation. To the Dacians, it was a demonstration of strength, a reminder that Dacia was not a passive neighbor, but a sovereign power willing to challenge imperial authority. Domitian responds. Emperor Domitian, though not as militarily gifted as his predecessor Vespasian or his successor Trajan, understood the implications of the attack. A decisive response was necessary to preserve Roman prestige. Massive Roman mobilization. Domitian dispatched a substantial force, legions from Pannonia, auxiliary cohorts, local allied troops, specialized engineers. He personally traveled to the Danube to oversee operations, though he did not lead the armies deep into Dacian territory. The first clashes. The Romans pushed northward into the rugged terrain of southern Dacia, only to discover that the mountains were not passive geography, they were allies of the Dacians. Dacian warriors fought with high intimate knowledge of the land, hit-and-run tactics, ambushes in narrow passes, swift cavalry maneuvers influenced by Sarmatian styles. The false, the curved Dacian blade proved devastating in close combat, capable of shearing through Roman shields and helmets. Roman casualties mounted. The death of Fuscus. One of the most significant early events in the war was the ambush of the Praetorian prefect Cornelius Fuscus, sent by Domitian to deliver a crushing blow to Decebalus. Fuscus marched deep into Dacian territory. His route is uncertain, but most scholars place the confrontation near the Vulcan Pass in the southern Carpathians. There, Dacian forces executed a masterful ambush. Roman accounts, even in their bias, speak with reluctant respect. The legion suffered catastrophic losses. Fuscus himself was killed. The legionary standards were captured. To lose a legionary eagle was one of the greatest disgraces Rome could face. The psychological impact reverberated throughout the empire. For the Dacians, the victory was monumental. It demonstrated that the mountains could be both shield and sword, and that their king was no mere tribal leader, but a strategist capable of defeating Rome's finest. Decebalus's strategy emerges. The Dacian king did not seek endless war. He sought strength through controlled conflict. His goals were clear: defend the heartland, demonstrate military capability, force Rome into negotiation, extract concessions to rebuild and strengthen Dacia. War was a means, not an end. He understood that Rome's internal politics played a role. Domitian needed a victory, or at least peace, more than he needed a costly mountain campaign. Decebalus exploited this. Roman reorganization. In response to Fuscus's defeat, Domitian reorganized his forces and launched another offensive under the command of Tedius Julianus, a more experienced general. Julianus's campaign. Julianus advanced cautiously, learning from his predecessor's mistakes. He avoided deep ambush zones, secured supply lines, used scouts more effectively, fortified temporary camps with greater discipline. This allowed the Romans to win a significant victory at Tapai in 88 CE near the Iron Gates of Transylvania. The battle was fierce with heavy casualties on both sides. Yet Tapai did not break Dacian resistance. It merely forced Decebalus deeper into the mountains. Julianus, knowing the season was turning and that winter campaigns in the Carpathians were lethal, halted rather than pushed toward Sarmizegetusa, Regia. Decebalus's counter moves. Though the Romans claimed Tapai as a victory, the strategic situation remained complex. Dacian alliances expanded. Decebalus secured support from Sarmatian Roxolani cavalry, Germanic tribes along the Danube, free Getic communities in the east. These alliances prevented Rome from isolating Dacia. Fortresses strengthened construction around Sarmizegetusa. Regia intensified. Walls grew thicker. Supplies were stockpiled. Escape routes expanded. Craftsmen worked day and night. Negotiations began, recognizing Rome's internal difficulties, including the revolt of Saturninus in 89 CE. Decebalus opened diplomatic channels. The result would be one of the most unusual treaties Rome ever signed. The Peace of 89 CE. Rather than launch a costly siege of the mountain fortresses, Domitian accepted a treaty that was remarkably favorable to Decebalus. Terms of the treaty. Rome paid Dacia an annual tribute. Rome provided engineers to fortify Dacian strongholds. Rome supplied money, tools, and craftsmen. Decebalus was recognized as a client king, though in practice he remained fully independent. In return, Decebalus agreed to cease raids and nominally respect Roman borders. Reactions in Rome. Members of the Senate were outraged. They viewed the treaty as humiliating, an admission that Rome had failed to crush a barbarian kingdom. But Domitian needed stability, and Decebalus seized the opportunity. A victory of strategy, not conquest. The First Dacian War ended not with the destruction of Dacia, but with the strengthening of it. Decebalus emerged stronger than ever. His army rebuilt, fortifications expanded, economy revived, alliances secured, prestige elevated. He had faced Rome and survived. More than that, he had used Rome's own resources to fortify his kingdom. This outcome was a masterclass in strategic manipulation, showcasing Decebalus's brilliance as a statesman. But Rome would not forget this humiliation. Within 2 decades, a new emperor would rise, one who would not tolerate the existence of a defiant Dacia. The peace was temporary. Storm clouds were forming. Transition to the Great War. As evening settles over the Danube and shadows lengthen across the frontier, the peace created by the Treaty of 89 CE feels fragile, brittle, destined to shatter. For while Decebalus uses the coming years to strengthen and fortify, Rome prepares as well. The War of Empires. The sun rises slowly over the Danube, its pale light glinting off the calm river and the watchful Roman fortifications that line the southern bank. A cold wind moves across the water, carrying with it the scent of spring and something else, anticipation. For years, a fragile peace has held this frontier in uneasy balance, but now, under the leadership of a new emperor, Rome is preparing for a final reckoning. On the northern bank, the forests are quiet. Dacian scouts stand like statues among the trees' cloaks, blending with the shadowed undergrowth. They watch the Roman side of the river, where an almost imperceptible change has taken place. More soldiers, more movement, more engineers surveying the land. The legions have begun to gather. The peace treaty Decebalus extracted from Domitian had bought Dacia time, but it had also humiliated Rome, and the new Emperor Trajan was not a man to tolerate humiliation, nor a threat to imperial stability. With discipline, with ambition, with methodical resolve, he would soon unleash one of the most determined military campaigns Rome ever undertook. This is the beginning of the Dacian Wars under Trajan, the War of Empires, the clash that would determine the fate of Dacia itself. Trajan ascends, a new era of Roman power. When Trajan became emperor in 98 CE, he brought with him decades of military experience, fame as a frontier commander, strong relationships with the legions, a personal sense of duty to restore Roman prestige. Unlike Domitian, Trajan was disciplined, respected, and deeply committed to expanding Rome's borders. Why Dacia became his first target. Several reasons aligned: revenge and honor. Rome had been forced to pay tribute to Decebalus, a stain Trajan refused to allow. Strategic security. Dacia's mountainous fortresses and alliances with Sarmatians posed a standing danger to Moesia and Pannonia. Economic incentive. The Carpathians were rich with gold and silver. Their mines could replenish Rome's treasury. Political capital. A victorious foreign war would consolidate Trajan's legitimacy as emperor. War was inevitable. Rome prepares, an empire on the move. The logistical preparations for the invasion of Dacia were immense, some of the most complex in ancient Roman history. Massive troop mobilization. Trajan summoned legions from across the empire. Legio II, Adiutrix, Legio IV, Flavia Felix, Legio V, Macedonica, Legio VII, Claudia, Legio X, Gemina, Legio XIII, Gemina, Legio IV, Gemina, Legio XXIII Apollinaris. Hundreds of auxiliary cohorts supplemented them, including archers from Syria, horsemen from Spain, and Germanic infantry. Engineering corps, Roman engineers, masters of military construction, were essential. They brought siege equipment, surveying tools, carpentry workshops, stonemasons, bridge-building crews, fortifications along the Danube. Trajan established new bases, reinforced existing ones, and ensured the frontier could support months of sustained military action. The greatest engineering feat, Trajan's bridge. To secure reliable passage for his armies, Trajan ordered the construction of a monumental bridge over the Danube near Drobeta. Designed by the master architect Apollodorus of Damascus, the bridge spanned more than a kilometer, used 20 massive stone piers, was considered one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. With this bridge, Rome gained a permanent route into Dacia, a symbolic and practical declaration of intent. Dacia prepares, Decebalus strengthens the heartland. Decebalus was not idle. Fortresses reinforced. He expanded the defensive network in the Oreshti Mountains, taller walls, thicker ramparts, underground storerooms, hidden water channels, secret exits, alliances. Renewed Decebalus sought support from Sarmatian Roxolani, Germanic tribes, Dacian communities across the Carpathian basin. Though not all joined him, the alliances increased the complexity of Rome's campaign, craftsmanship and armament. Dacian workshops worked tirelessly, forging falxes, constructing shields, preparing armor, training troops, strategic patience. Decebalus understood that Rome could not be defeated in open battle. His strategy focused on fighting in narrow passes, using ambushes, retreating strategically, drawing Rome deeper into rugged terrain. The mountains would be his ally. The first phase invasion of 101 CE. In the spring of 101 CE, Trajan crossed the Danube with his legions. Route and initial battles. The Roman army advanced through the Banat region, moving toward the iron gates of Transylvania. The Dacians met them with ferocity. Sudden strikes from forested hills, cavalry raids, attempts to destroy Roman supply lines. But the disciplined legions held steady their formations, absorbing the shock and pressing forward. The first battle of Tapai. At Tapai, the same pass where Romans had fought decades earlier, the first major battle occurred. The clash was brutal. Dacians fought with desperate courage, their falxes inflicting severe casualties. Romans countered with reinforced helmets and shields adapted after earlier experiences. At last, Trajan's forces gained the upper hand, driving the Dacians back. The path into Transylvania opened, but Decebalus did not break. He withdrew deeper into the mountains, sparing his forces for the next stage. Decebalus's counterattack. While Trajan advanced toward the Dacian heartland, Decebalus launched a bold counter-strategy: diversionary raids. He sent forces south of the Danube to attack Roman positions, forcing Trajan to divide his attention. Allies strike. The Roxolani and other groups conducted raids that threatened Roman supply lines, compelling Rome to redirect troops to protect logistics. Attempt at diplomacy. Decebalus also sought negotiations, possibly hoping to repeat the favorable treaty of 89 CE. But Trajan refused. He had come for complete victory. Second phase, the campaign of 102 CE. Trajan pressed onward. His legions reached the fortified zone of the Oreshti Mountains. Sarmizegetusa Regia was within sight, though still distant behind layers of defenses. Sieges and skirmishes. Roman forces besieged and captured several Dacian strongholds, including Kostesht, Capulna, other minor fortresses guarding key passes. The Dacians defended fiercely, but the Roman war machine slowly ground forward. Stalemate and negotiation. By mid-102 CE, both sides were worn down. Dacia had suffered losses in manpower. Rome had stretched its supply lines deep into hostile territory. Trajan, unwilling to risk a full siege of the Dacian capital at that moment, opened peace talks. The Treaty of 102 CE. This treaty was far harsher than the one Decebalus had won from Domitian. Terms imposed on Dacia: surrender of key fortresses, destruction of walls in certain regions, handing over of Dacian engineers who built war machines, forfeiture of Roman deserters who had served Dacia, acceptance of Roman oversight in foreign policy. Dacia remained independent, but weakened, restricted, and under close scrutiny. Decebalus's response. He accepted the treaty publicly, but privately he began preparing for another war. He rebuilt fortresses in secret. He stored weapons. He sought new allies. He plotted to free his kingdom from Rome's shadow. Trajan knew this. The empire prepared as well. Peace was merely an interlude. Toward the final confrontation. As the sun sets over the Danube and the land grows still, the stage is set for the greatest clash of all. The First Dacian War has ended, but neither side is satisfied. Trajan wants complete subjugation. Decebalus wants complete independence. Their ambitions are irreconcilable. The next war will be total. The fall of Sarmizegetusa. Night settles over the Oreshti Mountains like a dark shroud. The stars gleam with sharp brilliance above the rugged peaks, their cold light spilling into the deep valleys where forests murmur in the wind. At the heart of these mountains lies Sarmizegetusa Regia, once the beating soul of the Dacian kingdom, now a fortress bracing for the greatest storm in its history. Torches flicker along the wooden palisades. Warriors stand on the ramparts, eyes fixed on distant ridgelines. Far below, concealed by darkness, comes a faint and growing resonance like the distant roll of thunder. But it is not weather that approaches. It is the Roman Empire advancing step by relentless step. The year is 105 CE. The Second Dacian War has begun, and the fate of Dacia hangs in the balance. The end of peace. After the uneasy peace of 102 CE, neither side honored the treaty in spirit. Decebalus rebuilds. He fortified strongholds in secret. He replenished his army. He sought alliances with Sarmatians and Germanic tribes. He accepted deserters from the Roman legions who brought valuable engineering knowledge. To Rome, this was provocation. To Decebalus, It was survival. Trajan prepares. The emperor marshaled new legions, gathered massive supplies, and initiated unprecedented logistical operations. He intended a final decisive war that would end Dacia's independence permanently. The Roman machine advances 105 CE. The campaign began with the methodical precision that defined Trajan's military style. Two-pronged invasion. Trajan divided his forces. 1. Northern army crossing the Danube at Drobeta via Trajan's Bridge 2. Southern army pressing through the Olt Valley and other routes. This strategy forced Decebalus to defend multiple fronts. Roman war engines leading the way. Auxiliary units, cavalry, and siege engineers pushed ahead, clearing forests, building roads, and constructing temporary camps. The legions advanced behind them like a living wall of iron. Dacian resistance. Dacian warriors fought fiercely, ambushing supply lines, launching night raids, using the rugged terrain to their advantage. Yet they could not stop the Roman advance. Every hill taken by Rome tightened the ring around the heartland. The fortresses fall. One by one, the outlying Dacian fortresses succumbed. Kostest stormed after a bitter siege. Its defenders fought to the last. Blidaru, a masterpiece of Murus Dacica's construction, it resisted fiercely, but fell under the weight of Roman siege engines. Pietrarosci and Capilna, their walls shattered by Roman artillery, their defenders driven into the forests. The path to Sarmizegetusa Regia was now open, but the capital was no ordinary fortress. Sarmizegetusa Regia, the sacred citadel, perched atop a mountain plateau surrounded by terraces and defended by multiple fortification rings, Sarmizegetusa Regia was a marvel of Dacian engineering and spiritual power, a city of stone and sacred geometry. The complex included stone walls built in the Murus Dacicus technique, circular sanctuaries aligned with celestial events, water channels carved into bedrock, granaries filled with provisions, hidden tunnels for emergency escape. It was part fortress, part temple, part administrative center, a city where politics, religion, and astronomy intertwined. The heart of Dacian identity. For the Dacians, Sarmizegetusa was more than a capital. It was their spiritual axis, the dwelling place of priests, kings, ancestors, and gods. To take it would be to break the Dacian spirit. Trajan understood this. Decebalus understood it even more. The siege begins 106 CE. The Roman legions encircled the mountain. Camps were established on surrounding ridges. Siege engines were hauled upward through steep passes, an extraordinary feat of determination. Roman strategy. Trajan's plan was simple but brutal. Isolate the fortress, cut off supplies, destroy infrastructure, force surrender through hunger and exhaustion. The water supply sabotage. Roman engineers discovered the hidden Dacian water pipeline, a wooden aqueduct concealed beneath stone. They cut it. This was a devastating blow. Inside the fortress, panic spread as wells dried and cisterns shrank. The assault Roman siege engines, ballistae onagers, battering rams pounded the walls. Archers loosed volleys of arrows. Infantry advanced behind testudo formations. The Dacians fought with desperate ferocity, hurling javelins, rolling boulders, launching incendiary arrows, charging in furious counterattacks. But the ring tightened. The last stand. When the outer walls fell, the Dacians retreated to the inner terraces. Street by street, terrace by terrace, the fighting raged. Priests prayed over the wounded. Warriors fought until their weapons shattered. Decebalus was not in the city. He had slipped out to continue the fight elsewhere, to rally the surviving forces. The fall of the capital. At last, the Romans breached the final defenses. Sarmizegetusa Regia fell. The sacred sanctuaries were dismantled, the fortifications burned, treasures were seized, priests and nobles were killed or taken captive. It was the symbolic end of independent Dacia, but Decebalus still lived. The flight of the king. Decebalus fled westward with a small group of loyal warriors refusing to surrender. Roman cavalry pursued him relentlessly, led by the commander Tiberius Claudius Maximus, whose name would later be carved in stone as the man who hunted the Dacian king. The final moments, on a forested hillside surrounded and outnumbered Decebalus, made his final choice. Rather than be paraded through Rome in chains displayed as a trophy in Trajan's triumph, he drew a blade across his throat, dying by his own hand, preserving his honor to the end. Roman soldiers cut off his head and right hand, presenting them to Trajan. Thus ended the life of the man who had defied an empire. The aftermath. A kingdom destroyed with Decebalus, dead resistance collapsed. The remaining fortresses surrendered or fell in quick succession. The dismantling of a civilization. Temples were dismantled, strongholds destroyed, nobles executed or enslaved, mines taken under Roman control. The population displaced in several regions, Trajan declared victory. Dacia was now a Roman province. Its culture would survive only in fragments, artifacts buried in soil symbols, carved in stone memories, carried in folklore. The closing of an age. The fall of Sarmizegetusa, Regia marked the end of an ancient kingdom, an old way of life, a unique spiritual world, a fierce independence that had endured for centuries. It was also the beginning of something new, the Romanization of the Carpathian Basin, a transformation that would echo through the centuries. As the ashes of the fallen capital cooled, Rome's banners rose over the mountains. But Dacia's story was not truly over. Dacia under Rome. A soft morning haze settles over the newly built forum of Ulpia Traiana Sarmizegetusa. The sound of chisels tapping stone echoes through the valley, mingling with the distant clatter of carts and the murmur of merchants arranging their stalls. Marble columns still bright, still sharp-edged stand in elegant rows where once only forest and mountain shadow lay. Their smooth surfaces catch the early sunlight, casting slender, carefully measured shadows across the paving stones. This is not the Sarmizegetusa of the Dacian kings. This is Rome's Sarmizegetusa, reborn in the image of an empire. In the years after Trajan's conquest, the ancient land of the Dacians transformed with an astonishing speed. The survivors of a once independent kingdom now found themselves woven into the structure of the Roman world, its laws, its architecture, its economy, its religion. Yet beneath the veneer of imperial order, the spirit of Dacia continued to live quiet, persistent, rooted in mountain soil. This part explores the centuries after the fall of the kingdom, when Rome claimed Dacia as a province, reshaped it, and inevitably left a legacy that would echo long after the legions withdrew. The birth of a Roman province, 106 CE, following the defeat of Decebalus and the dismantling of the Dacian fortress network, Trajan wasted no time in reorganizing the territory. He established the province of Dacia, one of the most significant additions to the empire during his reign. A new capital, Ulpia Traiana Sarmizegetusa, built south of the old Dacian capital near the Hatzeg region, the new city symbolized Roman dominance. It boasted a forum surrounded by colonnades, a basilica for civic administration, temples to Jupiter, Minerva, Liber Pater, and other Roman gods, an amphitheater seating thousands, bath complexes fed by aqueducts, military headquarters, and administrative offices. The city stood as a statement: the old kingdom was gone, replaced by the order and grandeur of Rome. Roman settlement and colonization. Trajan initiated a large-scale colonization effort. Veterans from legions settled on newly surveyed lands. Civilians from across the empire, Spain, Italy, Thrace, Syria, North Africa, moved into the province. Towns grew rapidly along trade routes and mining centers. Dacia became a mosaic of peoples, languages, and customs. The mines, Rome's prize. Rome's interest in Dacia was not only strategic, it was deeply economic. Gold and silver mines. The Apuseni Mountains contained some of the richest deposits of gold in Europe. Under Roman control, mining operations intensified. New extraction techniques were introduced. Settlements grew around mining hubs like Alburnus Mayer. Wax tablets discovered. There preserved legal contracts, names and languages of the diverse population. Gold fueled the empire's finances and helped pay for Trajan's monumental construction projects, including the famous Column of Trajan in Rome, whose spiraling reliefs immortalized the Dacian Wars. Salt iron and timber. Dacia's salt mines, iron foundries, and forests supplied essential materials to the Roman frontier economy. The region became a logistical powerhouse, supporting military operations along the Danube. Urban life in Roman Dacia. The transformation of daily life was dramatic. Cities and towns flourish. In addition to Ulpia Traiana, Sarmizegetusa, major urban centers included Apulum, modern Alba Iulia, Napoca, Cluj-Napoca, Porolissum, Potaissa. These cities featured paved roads, aqueducts, amphitheaters, markets, temples, Mithraea, underground sanctuaries of the cult of Mithras. A blending of cultures, streets buzzed with a mix of Latin, Greek, Thracian, Celt, Iberian, Syrian, and even Dacian speech. Local artisans blended Roman styles with native motifs, spirals and wolves carved alongside Roman eagles, jewelry combining Dacian symbolism with Roman forms, pottery with hybrid decorative patterns. Romanization did not erase Dacian identity, it reshaped it. The Dacians in the Roman world. What happened to the people who survived the fall of the kingdom? Some Dacians served in the Roman army. Auxiliary regiments formed from local recruits fought across the empire, in Britain, in the Middle East, in North Africa. Dacian cavalrymen gained particular fame. Some Dacians became Roman citizens. Over time, through service or local administration, many Dacians gained Roman citizenship, adopting Roman names, participating in municipal councils, building local shrines, engaging in trade. Some retreated into remote areas. Not all accepted Roman rule. In forests and mountains, small communities preserved older traditions. Sanctuaries continued operating quietly. Local elites maintained a degree of autonomy. These populations would later form the substratum of post-Roman identity in the region. Religion in transformation. Religion in Roman Dacia became a tapestry of old and new beliefs. Roman deities take root, temples to Jupiter, Mars, Diana. Silvanus appeared in cities and military camps. Eastern cults spread. Because soldiers came from across the empire, mystery religions flourished. Mithraism in underground temples, Isis cult among urban artisans, local adaptations of Cybele and Serapis, fusion of Dacian and Roman beliefs. Despite the destruction of Sarmizegetusa, Regia Dacian spirituality survived in subtle ways. Votive inscriptions invoked local mountain deities, rural communities, honored ancestral spirits, solar and lunar symbols persisted in provincial art. Healing cults borrowed Dacian herbal traditions. The old religion was never fully extinguished. It blended, evolved, survived. Life on the frontier Dacia was not a quiet interior province. It was a borderland surrounded by free Dacian groups beyond Roman control. Sarmatians, Roxolani, Germanic tribes, Marcomanni Quadi Rome constructed an extensive limes frontier network with equus, watchtowers, earthworks, palisades, forts connected by roads. Soldiers patrolled daily. Skirmishes were common. Life was a constant negotiation between peace and vigilance, the height of Roman Dacia. Under Emperor Hadrian and later under Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius, Dacia reached its peak. Prosperous cities, booming trade, cosmopolitan culture, stable administration. The province was a jewel of the Danubian frontier, and yet beneath the prosperity pressure was building. The beginning of decline. By the late 2nd century CE, external threats increased dramatically. Marcomannic wars, Germanic tribes crossed the Danube in massive waves, shattering frontier defenses. Though Rome eventually repelled them, the province suffered enormously. Economic strain. Continuous warfare drained resources. Some mines faltered. Roads fell into disrepair. Internal instability. Local revolts and political upheavals within the empire shook the reliability of distant provinces. Rising pressure from free Dacians. Not all Dacians were conquered in 106 CE. Many communities north and east of the Roman province remained free and occasionally hostile. Their presence ensured that Roman Dacia was always precarious. The withdrawal under Aurelian 271-275 CE, by the mid-3rd century, Rome could no longer sustain Dacia. The Gothic and Carpic invasions devastated the region. Legions were overstretched. Borders collapsed. Emperor Aurelian made a difficult but strategic decision. Rome withdrew. He relocated Roman forces and civilians to the south of the Danube, forming the new province of Dacia Aureliana. The old province Trajan's Dacia was abandoned, cities emptied, roads fell silent, temples crumbled. Native populations blended with migrating peoples. What remained was a land once shaped by empire, now reverting to a patchwork of local communities, each preserving fragments of the past. The echoes that endure. Though Roman Dacia ended after only 165 years, its legacy endured profoundly. Latin language took deep root. Roman law influenced later governance. Roman roads shaped settlements. Dacian and Roman customs blended into new cultural forms. Christian traditions emerged from the mixture of Roman and local beliefs. Most importantly, memory survived. Across the centuries, the story of the Dacians warriors, of the mountains guardians of a unique spiritual world, would blend with the Roman legacy to form the foundations of future identities in the region. Transition to the final reflection. As the sun sets behind the Apuseni Mountains and the stones of Roman forums glow with fading light, one realizes that the story of Dacia did not end with Rome's departure. Its echoes persisted in folklore, in language, in the stones beneath the soil, and in the collective memory of generations. Echoes beneath the mountains. The late afternoon sun drifts toward the Carpathian horizon, painting the mountains in deep amber and soft violet. Long shadows stretch across grassy ridges, and the forests shimmer with a quiet, ancient stillness. A cool wind moves through the valleys, carrying scents of pine-wild herbs and distant wood smoke. It feels as though time itself has slowed, inviting memory to rise from the land. Here, in this twilight, in this calm, in this hush before nightfall, the story of the Dacians lingers like a whispered echo. No longer a kingdom, no longer a Roman province, but a memory woven through centuries, shaped by fragment and legend, soil and stone. This final part looks back across the ages, gathering the threads of Dacian history and reflecting on the legacy left behind, a legacy hidden beneath mountains, preserved in artifacts, inscribed in culture, and kept alive by the quiet persistence of memory. The afterlife of a civilization. When Rome withdrew from Dacia in the 3rd century CE, the land did not become empty. It became layered, a living palimpsest of peoples' influences and traditions. Dacians who remained, not all Dacians, had disappeared during Roman rule. Many communities lived beyond the Roman frontier, maintained ancestral customs, intermarried with Roman colonists, Sarmatians, and Goths, passed down stories of ancient kings and sacred mountains. The substratum of Dacian identity survived in these rural communities, preserved not through institutions but through memory. The land remembers. Even as cities fell to ruin and forests reclaimed old fields, the shape of the land preserved its past. Terraced hillsides where sanctuaries once stood, stone foundations hidden under moss. Forgotten roads used now only by shepherds. Sacred springs still flowing from rock, landscape became archive. The return of the ancient name centuries. Later medieval chroniclers encountered stories of ancient mountain warriors, tales of a kingdom that defied Rome, and memories of a people who believed in immortality. They wrote of Getai, Daci, Vlachs, Romanians blending history and folklore in their chronicles. The name Dacia returned not as a political unit, but as a cultural memory, a symbol of antiquity, endurance, and local pride. Medieval echoes. In medieval Romanian folklore, echoes of Dacian myths appear. Wolf motifs surviving in legends, serpent imagery in ritual dances, mountain spirits and sky deities with striking parallels to ancient cults, stories of wise hermits reminiscent of Zalmoxis' priests. These motifs reveal not direct continuity, but deep cultural resonance. Archaeological rediscovery. The modern rediscovery of Dacia began in the 19th century. Stone by stone, archaeologists uncovered the sanctuaries of Sarmizegetusa, Regia, the massive fortifications of Costești, Blidaru, and Piatra Roșii, ritual vessels and ceremonial jewelry, weapons bearing spirals and sacred animals, gold bracelets of extraordinary craftsmanship. These finds astonished scholars. They revealed a civilization with advanced engineering, rich religious symbolism, sophisticated metalworking, complex political structures. The Dacians were no longer a barbarian footnote, they were a major Iron Age civilization of Europe. Trajan's column as historical text. In Rome, the spiraling reliefs on Trajan's column became a crucial historical source. Scenes of Dacian fortresses, depictions of clothing, weapons, hairstyles, portrayals of rituals and negotiations, the image of Decebalus, proud and defiant. The column preserved what Dacia could not write for itself. Modern interpretations and national memory. During the 19th and 20th centuries, as national consciousness rose in Eastern Europe, the Dacians became a symbol of endurance and identity. Cultural revival artists, writers, and historians reimagined Dacian kings as heroes, mountain sanctuaries as sacred centers of wisdom, the cult of Zalmoxis as a spiritual heritage, Dacian-Roman fusion as the genesis of the Romanian people. Though sometimes romanticized, this revival highlighted the long memory of the land. Scholarly debates. Modern historians and archaeologists continue to debate the degree of Romanization, the survival of Dacian language elements, the extent of population continuity, the interpretation of religious symbols. These debates reflect a vibrant field of study shaped by new discoveries and advancing methodologies. The spiritual echoes. Dacian spirituality, though transformed by time, survives in subtle ways. Solar symbols carved into church stonework, mountain hermits reminiscent of ancient priests, healing traditions based on herbs known in antiquity, ancestral customs surrounding death and remembrance. Many rural beliefs blend Christian and pre-Christian elements, forming a tapestry whose oldest threads may trace back to the Dacian world. The stones speak. Still walk through the Orishtia mountains today, and you feel it. Terraces shaped by ancient hands, stones fitted with impossible precision, the faint outline of sanctuaries, circular platforms aligned with solstices, the remains of workshops and forges. These are not just ruins. They are echoes, whispers of rituals once performed beneath the open sky, footsteps of kings and warriors long returned to earth. Fragments of a worldview in which mountains held the souls of ancestors and time moved with the cycles of the sun. The legacy of a people between worlds. The Dacians stood at the crossroads between east and west, mountain and plain. Celtic, Thracian, and steppe cultures, Roman order and native independence. Their civilization was not isolated. It was constructed from centuries of contact and adaptation. Their uniqueness lay not in purity, but in synthesis. What endures? Cultural identity, a resilient sense of belonging to the Carpathian land. Symbolism, the wolf, the serpent, the spiral motifs found in art and folk traditions. Language influence, substratal elements in the Romanian language, especially in pastoral and botanical vocabulary. Historical memory, the legends of Decebalus and the shadow of Sarmizegetusa. Archaeological wonder, sanctuaries and fortresses that reveal unparalleled engineering. The Dacians may have fallen, but their story did not. Closing reflection beneath the quiet sky. As twilight deepens over the mountains, the land grows still. The sky darkens to deep indigo. Stars return glimmering above ridges that once echoed with the clash of steel, the chant of priests, the voices of kings. Time has flowed like the Danube, unceasing, reshaping all it touches, but it has not erased the memory of Dacia. The Dacians live on, in the stones of ancient fortresses, in the symbols carved into bracelets and shields, in the stories passed from generation to generation, in the echoes that rise from the mountains. When the wind is right, their kingdom is gone, but their legacy remains not as ruins, not as dust, but as an enduring presence woven into the cultural fabric of the land. For as long as the Carpathians stand, the echoes of the Dacians will whisper beneath their peaks.